Okay, so welcome everybody to Unit 4 of the Lunch and Learn series. And in this presentation this afternoon, we're actually going to look at how to get the very best out of other people, which of course is a perennial challenge we all face in leadership roles. So I'm going to share with you a couple of very practical things that you can do, and again, like everything else, there's homework attached to this, and I want you to go out and try to implement a few of these particular approaches. But before I go any further, let's just make sure I'm being heard. So where it's over in the question box, if you could just type in the word clear, that will help, because I don't want to be talking to myself for an hour. So let's just make sure that I'm... Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Bill. Thank you, John. Okay, obviously I'm coming in. Yeah, thank you. Good. All right, so it's obvious I'm coming through loud and clear, which is great. So again, if you've got questions or comments, the place to do this is over on the question box there. You just type in your question as you think about it, and I'll answer it as we go through the presentation. Saving it, don't bother saving it up to the end, and so on. So I'm just going to minimize my screen so I can. Okay. All right. So now, let's get that smaller so I can see the screen. Okay. All right, now, look, the 6 modules there are on the screen, or they certainly will come up very soon. There we go. So we're obviously up to module number 4 today, and I hope you're still giving regular feedback, which is obviously the content for the first module that we looked at. We looked at the influencing capabilities profile, and I hope you're trying to vary the way you influence other people. To improve your capacity to get other people to do things willingly and ethically the way you want them to, of course. We talked about conversations in the last session, which is module 3, and optimizing team performance really came down, as I said, to the notion of giving regular feedback and also to have regular conversations with people. So we'll talk a little bit now about the psychology behind people and what you might do or not do to be able to build up greater sense of performance. Now, the first thing I want to say about this is that we're not aiming to get everybody at 100%, because let's be realistic about it, it's not going to happen. But it is possible. It is possible to get people from a 60 to a 70%, or a 40 to a 50, or a 90 to 100. It is possible to do that, and that's what we should be aiming to do. So that, I just want to sort of temper people's expectations around that. Sometimes, and of course, motivation is an interesting topic, because you could be doing everything right, and you still aren't getting the results that you want, because the fact of the matter is you can't actually motivate anybody. And I wonder if you've ever thought about that. All you can do is create the circumstances or the environment by which people become motivated. That is all you can do. And that's an important point to make here, that really all we can do is create the motivational environment or climate. I would argue also that your primary role is actually really about getting the best out of each member of your team. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, you've got tasks, you've got things that have to be done, you've got products to deliver, you've got services to provide. All of those things are critically important, and your job ultimately as a leader, put aside the notion of being a manager, your ultimate aim as a leader is to get the very best out of the people you lead. So I'm hoping you accept that, because to me that's critically important. And you might say, well, you know, is that really my responsibility? And I would say absolutely. Do you have complete control over that? not necessarily, but you do have a responsibility, and it's critically important to exercise that responsibility, in my view. So let's have a look at the 4 things that we want to talk about during this short, sharp session. I'm going to talk about some myths around motivation, and the reason for that is simply this, that there are a lot of myths floating around about what motivates people, and I'd like to dispel those up front, and let's get clear about that. I'm going to share with you some research about what people actually want out of their work, out of their job, and you can probably look at 4 or 5 different surveys on this. You would probably get some different results, but not dramatically. There are some common factors that people want in their job, and I think what we've got to try and do is do whatever we can to either remove the barriers for those common factors, or at least implement processes and things that can help them achieve that. We'll look at the concept of job and non-job tasks. We talk a lot about people's jobs, but we don't talk much about the non-job roles that people play, and they do play a significant number of roles, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in, or they should be playing those roles at least. And I'll share with you a couple of models of motivation that have stood the test of time, and obviously if you pick up any reputable book on motivation, you'll find that there is not just one nice, neat theory, because there isn't. It's quite elusive. There are a number of different factors that need to be considered, and we will consider those. All right, so let's get underway. Now, the first thing I want to do, I know this slide's a bit busy, but when it comes up, you'll be able to. Let's define what we mean by motivation, because I think if we're sort of got different views about what motivation is, it's probably going to skew our perception of the rest of the material in this webinar. So you'll see the definition there, and this is one of many definitions, but I think it's a good definition. Motivation is the force within an individual that accounts for the level, direction, and persistence of effort extended at work. So I've highlighted some key words there. Within, in other words, the implication is that people themselves motivate themselves. Sure, there might be external stimuli, but at the end of the day, it's people's responsibility to motivate themselves. And it's about the level, direction, and persistence of effort. So let's talk about each of those 3: level, direction, and persistence. So what do we mean by that? Well, the direction is the person's choice of where they present with a number of alternatives. So this is about people's priorities. So we've all seen people working on things that we know are a low priority. And sometimes as a leader we point that out to people if it's appropriate. Other times we walk away scratching our head. So one of the factors, or one of the dimensions of motivation, is that people are working on the right things in the right way at the right time with the right people. So this is about looking at your core job responsibility and being able to spend the majority of your time, we call this the 80-20 or the 20-80 rule, spending 80% of your time on the 20% of things that are critically important to the core attribute of your particular role. So where you expend your energy, direction, is one dimension. Another dimension that's critically important is the level of persistence that one shows in dealing with the work that they do. Now, in other words, how long a person sticks with a given action. Now, we know some people will give up fairly easily. Other people will be quite dogged and continue until they achieve their success. So we're looking for people who are persistent, that don't just stop at the first roadblock, and inevitably there'll be roadblocks. So it's the direction that people expend their energy, and it's the persistence that they put in that are 2 dimensions. The third dimension and some people get this dimension confused with persistence, is the level of intensity of effort that we put in. So this is about how committed we are and how intense we are completing the work that needs to be done. So we're looking for intensity, we're looking at persistence, and we're looking at direction. Now, this definition is very important for you because we often generalize, don't we, about people and say, well, that person over there, they're not motivated. That person over there is very self-motivated. What we need to do is we need to look at people in a little bit more of a critical way and say which of those dimensions are missing. So are people clear about their priorities? Are people persisting long enough in achieving the objectives that they set themselves? And are people putting in a level of intensity that is going to lead to the achievement of that particular objective? So I would encourage you, when you're having conversations with people about perhaps a lack of motivation, that instead of talking about a lack of motivation, what you really should be talking about is either their direction, their persistence, or the level of intensity. And I think that becomes far more meaningful, not only for you as the observer, but also for the other person, so that they understand what's missing. So in other words, you can have two of these things in play, and the other one's is not evident. So for example, you can be very persistent and you can be very intense, but you're working on the wrong things in the wrong way at the wrong time. So obviously you talk to people about their direction, their motivation, their priorities. Or a person can be very clear about what they need to do in their work. They can also be quite intense for a short period of time, but give up. Well, obviously you're wanting to talk to people about their persistence, and so on. So I hope that's helpful for you to start the ball rolling in terms of motivation and a definition, a working definition of it. So let's talk now about some myths around motivation and some of the things that people still hang on to when they think about motivating other people. One of the big myths about motivation, I've alluded to this already, is that you can't actually motivate people. You can only provide the circumstances by which people decide to become motivated. Now, this is very important, and I certainly know that in my career, in my managerial career, in my early days, I actually thought and prided myself in my ability to motivate other people. No, the person makes the decision themselves to be motivated. All I have to do is to take away the roadblocks and to provide the circumstances and the feedback and the environment, and ultimately it's up to that individual to make the decision to become motivated. Now, we've all been to presentations at conferences and so forth, and two people are sitting side by side, and one person walks away very excited about what they heard, and the other person walks away not so excited. Right? They both had the same stimuli, which of course was the speaker. One was motivated and one was not. It's about the individual's choice about whether they become motivated or not. So that's really important. In other words, you could be doing all the right things and still not achieve the level of motivation that you hope from the individual that you're attempting to motivate. Another important point is that everybody actually is motivated. I know that might seem a bit strange because I'm sure you can think of people that are quite lazy, or they're missing all three of the dimensions that I just referred to earlier. But the reality is everybody is. I mean, even getting out of bed this morning is a level of motivation, not a particularly high one, I wouldn't have thought. But people might have got out of bed this morning because they were fearful of the consequences of not getting out of bed, or they might have got bounced out of bed because they were so excited about their day at work. All right, but everyone's motivated. But here's the important point: not everybody's inspired. So, if you doubt this, if you just thought about it for a moment and you actually knew or came across the person that was the least motivated, and you decided to go out to the river or the surf or something, and you grabbed that person by the scruff of the neck and held their head underwater for a period of time, you'll find that they're very motivated. They will do everything they can to come up for a breath of air. So we are all at some level motivated. The question really is, are we inspired? And the truth of the matter is that some people come to work and they just don't believe that work, not the work they do, work in general, is inspirational. In other words, they work to live, not live to work. And there's not much you can do about that because they have their own construct about what they believe work is. All right, motivation is highly subjective, and again, and this is the trap that leaders fall into. What motivates you doesn't necessarily motivate other people. And I've fallen into this trap, and, for example, I'm motivated by self-development. I put a significant amount of effort into my own personal development and have for a long period of time. I just make the assumption sometimes, which is very dangerous, that everybody's interested in developing themselves. Well, they're not. And it's a hard lesson for me sometimes to learn. Everybody has a sense of motivation, which is totally subjective. So somebody who robs banks is motivated by something that is clearly not the motivation that I'm motivated by. So people could be motivated by prestige, they can be motivated by title, they can be motivated by doing good in the world, they can be motivated by the fringe benefits. There are so many different possibilities, and the thing for you is to spend time in the lunchroom or with the people that you lead and listen to them and work that out for yourself. Find out by listening and considering why are they at work and what does work mean for them in their life and what might you do as a result of that to assist them to create the environment by which they become even more motivated. Now, you've probably heard of the terms intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation being internal. So this is motivation that comes from within. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is the carrot and the sticks approach. This is external to the person. So in our world of work, we spend lots of time rewarding people and lots of time punishing people because we make the assumption that extrinsic motivation works. Well, I'll tell you, it does to a certain extent, but for knowledge workers or people with a reasonably high level of education, it doesn't work, or anywhere near to the extent that we hope it does. So that's why you often hear recruiters saying that it's best to employ people who are intrinsically motivated than to employ people who have got a high skill level and perhaps a low motivational level. So intrinsic motivation is the way to go. Now, you might find this one a bit controversial. It often gets a bit of discussion going, but in my view, and it's not only my view, but money is overestimated as a motivational force. Now, am I saying money doesn't matter? Absolutely not. I mean, you stop paying people tomorrow and there's a very good likelihood they won't turn up to work, or if they do, it won't be for the work, it'll be for the money. So to a certain extent, money is important. But what studies have shown is that over a certain amount of money, the money itself is a motivational force. So by paying people more, you won't necessarily, of course, get people to perform better. Think of a salesperson, for example. we could double their bonuses overnight. And I'd be quite confident in suggesting to you that it will not double the sales. It might increase it somewhat, but it won't double it. So money itself is not a motivational force, or certainly not, it's overestimated. If you actually think about it, money is just paper and metal. It's obviously what money can do that's critically important. So money itself is not the motivational force, it's what it can do. So I think, I've seen a lot of examples of this where people haven't gone on and worked for another job that pays more on the basis that they feel that they'd be more comfortable and more fulfilled where they are. And I see that time and time again. So let's not delude ourselves into thinking that if we throw money at people, it will motivate them. It won't necessarily be the case. If you wanted to simplify the whole discussion around this, you would actually say that people are motivated by two forces, pain or pleasure. People will often do things, in fact, everything that all of us in life do is to avoid pain and to seek pleasure. If you think about it, every single thing that we do is to avoid pain and seek pleasure. Now, that sounds very simple, but the issue really is that every one of us conceptualizes pain and pleasure differently. So what's painful for one person is not painful for another. What's pleasurable for this person is not pleasurable for that. Think about it this way. Two people are in cars, separate cars, side by side at a set of traffic lights. Both of those people are going to the same meeting. Both of them are late to that meeting. The person in the car on the left-hand side is absolutely stressed, absolutely worried, and almost sick because of the thought of being late to the meeting. The person on the right is listening to some gentle classical music and is just chilling out, knowing full well that they're going to be late and there's nothing they can do about it. Now, who's right and who's wrong? Well, that's not the point. The point is that they're both conceptualizing that set of circumstances differently. The person on the left is conceptualizing that as a painful experience. The person on the right is not necessarily conceptualizing it as a pleasant experience, but they're certainly not conceptualizing it as a painful experience. Now, this research that I'm going to share with you looks at the 10 qualities employees want from their job. Now, this was put together by a fairly extensive research of several thousand people across a number of industry groups, 21 industry groups, put together by Harvard, 2005. So yes, it's not new, although it's not that old either. And it simply asked people to indicate if they could indicate one quality that they considered to be the most important in any job that they undertook, what would it be? So what do you think might be their number one? What do you think? And of course, once that was all that information was collected, and then on the basis of a frequency, they put down the 10 top things that employees wanted in a job, transcending a number of industries and cultures. What do you think the number one thing was? You might actually be quite surprised about this. Here it is. The number one thing that people want in their job more than anything else is to work for efficient managers. There you go. And of course, this whole Lunch and Learn series is about that. So if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because the old adage that people don't leave organisations, they leave managers. So often when people leave, and I've done a lot of exit interviews, people will often tell me that the real reason they're leaving is because they have no relationship, or indeed a very poor relationship, with their manager. It's also true to say that the manager has enormous influence and impact over a person and the work that they do. So you can probably understand why people have indicated the most important thing that they want out of their job is to work for an efficient manager. So there's a bit of a tale in that, isn't there, for us all in this Lunch and Learn today, and that is we need to continually develop our skills in leading people, because that is the number one excuse me, the number one quality that people want out of their work. What do you think number 2 was? Well, here it is. The number 2 quality that people wanted most out of their work was to think for themselves. Now, I know some of you in this broadcast are probably thinking to yourselves, I wish some people would think for themselves. But yes, people want autonomy. They want to be able to think through what they're doing. And this is probably why professionals, whether they be accountants or lawyers or teachers, this is why they probably have more job satisfaction than people who are pretty much told what to do, say in a semi or unskilled role, such as working in a production area. People want to think for themselves. They want to design the way they do things, and they want to be able to create their own destiny that way. So if you're a micromanager, trust me, you're not doing much to create the motivational environment by which people become motivated, if in fact number 2 on the list is to think for themselves. We want people to do that. Number 3, and this is very interesting because number 3 is not the work itself, but the end result of the work. People actually want to see tangible evidence that the work that they do makes a difference. Now, that probably doesn't surprise people when you think about it. I found it very interesting that I was doing some work in local government. In fact, I do a lot of work in local government. And what I did is I went out and spoke to the outdoor staff, that are the people who tend to the roads and the gardeners and so forth in council environments. And I simply asked them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would they rate their job satisfaction? So they scored it out of 10, 10's high, 1's low. I aggregated those results and came up with a mean score of 6.2. I then went into the indoor staff, these are the people doing administrative and clerical jobs, and I asked them exactly the same question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate your current job satisfaction? And they would score that, and then I aggregated those scores. And their score ended up, surprising to me, 5.9. So 6.2 versus 5.9. In other words, in a collective sense, the outdoor workers had greater job satisfaction than the indoor workers. And I found that rather surprising because I simply assumed that people who worked in the outdoors doing what I might perceive to be fairly mundane jobs had a higher job satisfaction than somebody who had perhaps some challenging projects to work on in their team. But when I scratched a bit further, I realised it's because there are tangible evidence. There's tangible evidence of success. People can see the road they built. They can see the pothole filled. They can see the fence mended. They can see the garden tended to. So they can actually see that, whereas somebody in an office environment may have to write a report and that report goes nowhere, or they're not aware of how that report has influenced decision making. So one of the things that we have to do as leaders is to try and find evidence that the work that our people do has meaning. So it means that if, for example, a customer's happy, we need to be able to share that with other people. It means that if we've got a good client who's happy with the work that, say, a lawyer's done, we need to share that with the lawyer, because it's obvious that we want to feel that the work we do has some tangible benefit. And in some careers and some occupations, it's not quite so clear what that tangible benefit is. And our job as leaders is to help people see that. Number 4 is that people want to cite interesting work to do. Now, a lot of work that we do is drudgery, let's be honest. It doesn't matter whether you're a scientist, a rocket scientist, or a ditch digger, or whatever you might do. A lot of what you do is actually drudgery. And there's no escaping for that. So, for example, police spend a lot of time locking people up. They also spend a lot of time attending to paperwork. They have to account for the time and the effort that they put in. That's not particularly exciting work, filling out paperwork, but it has to be done. I don't think we can do much about that other than to try as much as we can to give people and delegate to people exciting assignments to do and things that will make a difference wherever possible. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Number 5 on the list was to be informed. People want 2 sources of information. They want to know how to do their job more effectively. So this might be learning and development. It could be around new approaches and so forth. But they also want to know what's happening with the organisation that they happen to be a member of. They want to know what the strategic direction is, where the organisation's heading, and what's in the future. And not all those answers, of course, are forthcoming and easy to predict. But people want to be kept informed. In fact, I would love $100 for everyone that's told me, as an employee, that they themselves have not been kept informed about a particular issue. So being informed is important. People want to feel that they're being listened to. And again, this is something that managers and leaders don't do particularly well. We need to be good listeners. We need to improve our capacity to listen. And one of the reasons that we don't listen is because the rate to which we think is a lot faster than the rate to which people can talk. So we tend to be racing ahead in our own mind and not listening to what people have actually told us. The other reason we don't listen is that we've already anticipated, rightly or wrongly, what someone's going to say. And because we've already done that, we've lost interest. All right? So there's a range of reasons why we don't listen. But my suggestion to you is to spend a bit more time listening to people. Okay, now if you're in the middle of doing something, as I said last time we met, and you can't give people the benefit of you being able to listen to them right there then please, the key is to indicate to the person that you've got to finish doing the email that you are attending to, and the moment that you finish that, you'll come over and listen to what they have to say. Or stop the email, close the laptop, and give them 100% attention. But don't try and do 2 things at once. People want to feel respected. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you must like or appreciate all of the choices that people make in the workplace, in their personal life or whatever. It doesn't mean you can't have an opinion about it. It simply means you should fundamentally respect all the people that work with you as people working with you. And the moment you show any lack of respect is the moment that you will do something to demotivate them by creating a climate that's not quite as motivational. So fundamentally respect people. Again, it's easy to talk about, not so hard to do, particularly when you don't agree with their sets of their belief or their mindset or whatever. Number 8, people want to be recognised for their efforts. I am not a big believer in praise in public and criticise in private. My view about this is that you should do both in private, because some people are shy. Some people do not want you to draw attention to them by drawing attention to them in a public way. So pull them aside, thank them for the work that they've done genuinely, and that's all you need to do. All they need to know is that you have recognised the effort, not that you've done it in front of 10, 20, 30 people. People often don't like that. Number 9, people want to feel that they are challenged in the work that they do. Now, they don't want to be overwhelmed, but they do want to feel some stimulation that comes from the challenge of the work and how it presents itself. Everyone, of course, has their threshold around what challenge is. But I think if you're not stretching people, then what's happening is you're not fulfilling one of their 10 qualities that they want in a job. And finally, number 10, they want to have an opportunity to develop themselves. So that's why L&D is such a critically important platform in any organisation. They want to attend courses. They want to be coached. They want to be shown how to do things. They need to know that their boss will sponsor their learning efforts. All right, so there's the 10. Now, as you look at those 10, you're probably not wildly surprised about it, but you've got a very good framework there to work with. So if you honour those 10 things in the work that you do, then you're likely to create the motivational environment that people will feel a sense of intrinsic motivation. Now, there are other things too, but we don't want to confuse people. 10's good enough at this stage. Now, I want to pose this question for you. If you have one person in your team who's just not motivated, what do you do? Now, bear in mind, as I said before, everyone's motivated, but this person just doesn't seem to be inspired. What do you do? Where do you start? And I dare say that you have got one of these people. And you may have tried plan A, plan B, plan C. You've tried lots of things. The answer to that question is this. The answer is ask them. Ask them. How do you do that? Well, you simply say to them, look, I'm keen to know what could I be doing more of or less of that'll help you do your job even more effectively. Ask them. Now, sometimes you won't get a good answer, but occasionally you will, and you might get a surprising answer. But it's the sign of respect that you would be prepared to ask somebody how you can better serve them as their leader. So there's nothing sneaky or, it's a perfectly valid question to ask. What can I do more of? What can I do less of that might help you to enjoy the work that you do more so? What a wonderfully affirming question. And sometimes people will give you a great response. Sometimes they'll fold it off too and say, oh no, there's nothing really. It's just me. You've given them the opportunity. They may not have taken it, but at least you've asked the question. So down the bottom there, I just made a statement. Is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that can help you to be more engaged in your work? That's a perfectly valid and reasonable and honourable question for you to ask. Now, let me talk about the work that people do, and I really think that we spend too much time on what's in the functional capacity of people's job, and we really don't spend enough time on the non-job, what I call non-job tasks. Let me just draw this out for you. Now, the job role that people play is normally encapsulated in the job description. So this is their core or primary reason for being employed. These are the key performance indicators and the things that people are expected to do their job. Okay. Now, I'm not going to talk much about that today because at the end of the day, you're the expert on what the technical aspects of the work that you expect other people to do. But what about this dimension? What about the non-job roles that people play? And you might say, what do you mean by non-job roles? Well, non-job roles are linked to performance, but perhaps not directly, perhaps indirectly. But these things, nevertheless, are critically important for performance. So in other words, performance is two-dimensional. It's job-related and it's non-job related. And I've selected 4 areas that I think, in my view at least, are non-negotiable. And I think that if you give people feedback and talk about these things, it is a good thing to do. One of the non-job roles that I expect people to play in work, particularly the people that work for me, is I expect people to come to work with a reasonably positive attitude and a level of enthusiasm. Now, we all know people that don't do that. We know people that come to work whinging, complaining, always negative, always looking to blame someone else, covering their backside, and so forth. Those people are enormously energy sapping. I don't expect people to come to work bouncing off the walls, but I do expect them to come to work with a solution focus and an ability to work with and through other people to get the job done. So what's wrong with you? Can you imagine a workplace where everybody is negative? I don't care how positive, how good the technical skills are. That workplace is not going to be performing very well on the basis that everybody is having a negative attitude to the work that they're doing. So that's the first thing. The second non-job role that I think is critically important is what I call the team role. Now, the team role, we expect people to be team players, and I think rightly so. But I often hear people say to me, I'm not a team player. Well, become one, because the fact of the matter is that's the way organisations are these days. They're pretty much built around teams. To have somebody that's not a team player can be hugely destructive or detrimental to the organisation. So expect them to be team players. Another role that I expect people to play is what I call a career role. I'm actually expecting people to grow and develop their skill set in the workplace. And I think it's perfectly valid for you to expect that. I see it time and time again, and particularly in some educated professions, where people have stopped growing. If people stop growing, they're going backwards. And I think that it's perfectly valid for you to expect other people to continually grow and build their skill set. Okay? Because, and it's not just all about you. The fact is, if somebody doesn't build their skill set and they're going to go backwards, they're not doing much for their employability, obviously. So we want people to grow and develop on a regular and consistent basis. Finally, we want people to bring their ideas to work with them. We want people to be creative. We want people to be looking for ways to make the workplace more efficient and effective. Now, I don't want people leaving their brains in a paper bag at the doorway. I want them to come to work switched on, ready to contribute. And I think it's fair and reasonable for you to expect the same thing from other people. True? So have a think about that for a moment. You've got two dimensions around performance. You've got a job role, which is obviously what's on the job description, but you've got a whole other dimension around non-job roles. So I would argue that you're actually expecting people to play 5 roles at work: 1 job role and 4 non-job roles. Now, if you doubt the relevance of the non-job role, have a think about this. Imagine if your workplace was filled with highly technically competent people, and may well be, but all of those people had a negative attitude. They were all individuals who weren't interested in contributing to the team. They'd all stopped growing, and they were all not interested in offering ways and means of improving the organisation. Guess what? That would be a team, that would be an organisation that is not high performing. Without a doubt, that will be found wanting. So I think it's fair and reasonable for people to exhibit those non-job roles. So don't be afraid to talk to people about those things. Use critical incidents to make the point about how you need them to step up in those areas. For example, if somebody in a team meeting has said 3 negative things in a row to 3 people who've come up with suggestions, then pull them aside at the end of the meeting and saying, look, I just noticed you made 3 comments in the meeting. It's great that you're contributing, but the reality is they were 3 negative comments. And all that did was bring and drag down the morale of the team. I really need you not to do that in future. There's nothing wrong with that. It's based on critical incidents. Now, they might say to you, oh, yes, I was just being constructive, and say, well, be constructive. I don't think you were. I think you were being negative, and have a discussion about that. Now, I want to finish up by talking a couple of, the reputable theories that are out there around motivation, and talk about how it impacts on the work you do. Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been around since, I think, around the 1940s. Now, Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, an industrial psychologist, who was out to dinner one night, and I believed, as the story goes, he drew on a napkin this model, which is his hierarchy of needs model. And he was subsequently quite embarrassed. I don't think he'd be too embarrassed, but he was a little bemused by the fact that this theory took off, that people started to use it. And of course I'm using it now because it's got a lot of face validity. His argument was that once a need had been fulfilled, it no longer became a need, and that the next layer of needs was indeed the important variable. So, for example, he argued that survival was our fundamental need. So he would argue that if people weren't surviving, their life was in threat, then, or they had no food and water, they're not interested in anything else other than securing, food and water. Once that's been fulfilled, the next thing that people will be motivated by is a sense of security, people being protected from physical and mental bullying or harassment. So security becomes the next one. Everyone wants to feel a sense of belonging. And so unless they feel a sense of belonging in your team, they're highly likely not to belong, not to feel that they do belong, and their motivation level will suffer. People want to feel important. They want to feel that their opinion counts for something. And once they feel a sense of belonging, then they'll be happy to share their opinions, and that's where you would motivate somebody at the high level. And finally, people who want to be self-fulfilled means that people who are continually growing and developing as people. Now, the trap, of course, that leaders fall into is that many of us are actually at the top of the apex. So we are at what Maslow originally called self-actualization. And because we're there, we're assuming that everybody else around us is exactly the same. Not true. So the only three that you have to worry about in the workplace is security, belonging, belonging, prestige, and self-fulfillment. People want to feel they belong, people want to feel important, and people want to be able to develop. So it's important that you try to do that as much as you can. So a very practical example, in a team meeting, you've got someone very quiet in the corner who hasn't said anything. You are perfectly within your rights, and in fact it's a good idea to say to that person, Fred, is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation? And they can say no. Or Mary, I haven't heard from you yet. Would there be something you'd like to contribute? So it's opening up a doorway for people to feel that they belong. And of course, if they say something that's worth considering, then you should say that, which is prestige. And self-fulfillment is where you're giving people an opportunity to challenge themselves. So Maslow makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Another theory, and I found this one very interesting, McGregor was the first, academic who came up with a view that motivation came from the assumptions that people have about other people. And he came up with this very simple theory, a theory X and a theory Y. His argument was that theory X managers were people who, that most people disliked what they did. They'd do anything they could to avoid work. They were fundamentally lazy. They'd prefer to be shown what to do rather than think for themselves, and so forth. Now, if any of you have worked for a Theory X manager, it is soul-destroying because they second-guess you, they give you no autonomy, they're assuming the worst in you, and that is the worst possible way to lead people. Theory Y managers, on the other hand, are people who believe that work is natural. People will direct themselves and so forth given the opportunity. People will seek out responsibility. I'm certainly a Theory Y manager, and probably you are too. There's nothing wrong with you adopting that assumption. In fact, I think it's absolutely critical in order to create the motivational environment from which people will flourish. Another theory, which is Daniel Pink's theory, well, it actually comes from operant conditioning initially, and that is that people are motivated by carrot and sticks. So we give people carrots when they do it right, we give them the stick when they do it wrong. What Daniel Pink's research has shown is that people who are in knowledge positions, knowledge workers, are actually not as motivated by carrot and stick as we would like to think. Never mind that in terms of rudimentary work that is, work in a factory area or repetitious work, that's a different story. People are actually motivated by carrots and sticks. So it's important for us to understand that if we're working with knowledge workers, don't worry about the carrot and the stick. Try some other tactics, which is far more useful. Carrot and stick works well with circus animals. The trainer has a stick in one hand and a pocket full of treats in the other. Works very, very well. It doesn't necessarily work very well with a bunch of professionals that you're working with. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't reward people extrinsically, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't pull people up when they don't meet their key performance indicators, but don't rely on it as a form of motivation. In fact, what Daniel Pink said in his excellent book Drive, which I'd strongly recommend you get a hold of, he argued that there were three key things that people are motivated by at the knowledge worker level. People want autonomy, they want mastery, and they want a sense of purpose. In other words, they want to decide how they do things their way. They want a sense of being able to build their skill level, and they also want to know the why of what they're doing. They need to understand the big picture of why they're doing what they're doing. Now, if a leader can give people autonomy, provide them with mastery, and offer them a purpose, then the argument, according to Pink, is that you are creating the motivational environment for a professional person to become motivated. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So let's bring this all together at the end of this particular webinar. What are some guides for managing motivation? You need to give people some clarity around the task that you expect them to do. They need to understand what the end result is. They don't need you to tell them how to get there, but they do need you to tell them what it looks like when they do get there. So give them a destination. Show people how they can contribute. In other words, focus on non-job roles as much as job roles. So it's no good for someone to say, I do everything on my job description. It doesn't say that I shouldn't be a pain in the backside, but I do everything, so that's fine. Well, it's not actually, because that person's dragging everybody else down. So show them how they can contribute in their non-job roles as much as their job roles. Try to match people as much as you can with their talents and strengths. Now, this mightn't be in terms of jobs, but you may be able to do this in terms of deferring to people at meetings and say, look, Fred, you're really good at being able to sum up the essence of an argument. Would you mind taking the notes, please, for this meeting? And at the end of it, I'll ask you to give us a summary, because I know that's something you're very good at. All right, we're utilising their strengths, their capabilities, even in a one-off meeting scenario. Make it apparent the personal gains for personal and team productivity. This is the concept of letting people see the line of sight between what they do and the end result. And, you know, it's amazing to me how small these things can be and what a huge difference they can make. So if you're dealing with a customer and you go out of your way to assist them, that can be life-changing. For example, if you're a travel agent and you've helped that person organise their first trip and it was a wonderful experience, you've had a huge impact on that couple. Or if you're a teacher and you've made an encouraging comment in a timely way, you have made an enormous contribution to that child. That child may never ever forget what you said in that situation. And we can all remember things like that. So let people know the why of what they're doing. Try to link the big picture. Remove organisational roadblocks. Wherever there are roadblocks in any of these things, if you as a leader can remove those roadblocks, you are in fact creating the motivational environment by which people become motivated. So, and if you can't, just acknowledge them and move on. So if there's a whole lot of bureaucratic paperwork that has to be done, then you just accept it, grit your teeth and do it. But of course, if you can lessen it, or you can do something to reduce the burden, then go ahead and do it. But you've got to be pragmatic about it, of course. Remove the supervisory roadblocks. And I think what I'm alluding to here is the fact that we, not all of us, but many of us have a tendency to micromanage. But you've just got to take a deep breath and realize that people have their own way of doing things. And remember what number 2 on the list was? People want to think for themselves. Let them think for themselves. Your job is to help them think for themselves, not to stop them thinking for themselves. Give people lots and lots of feedback. Let them know how pleased you are with the effort that they've made. And do it in private, because if they're shy and introvert, they don't want you to make a song and a dance about them in front of everybody else. It's not necessary. Encourage people to develop their own goals. Encourage people to develop their own learning objectives. Encourage them to consider what they're aiming to achieve, because remember, it's intrinsic motivation that's critically important. Here it goes again. Provide frequent and positive feedback. Give people frequent and positive feedback. If you walked out of here now, if it's lunch, and you decided to go out and thank 3 people for work that's been done, I can assure you that will make a difference. And how easy is it to do? So we get all tied up in our own little world. Sometimes just saying thank you is enough. So guys, your homework, I'm just finishing up now, just got a little bit over time, but your homework is to try to use autonomy, mastery and purpose in your leadership decisions and conversations, and stick to it no matter what. Okay? I want you to have a go at that. I'm sure you'll be successful. Tell me how you went. Send me an email. I love hearing from people in this program. Or if you find that it hasn't quite worked the way you would hope, let me know. Let me know. It's probably you just approached it slightly differently. So that brings us pretty much to the end of Unit 4 or Module 4. And I hope that you've got something useful and practical out of that will help you get the very best out of the people you lead. So thank you everyone, and I wish you all the very best until we meet again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.